As you may have seen from the announcement, gentlemen, the Fox Squad limited banners are about to release, alongside a huge update, the 2.0 update, if you prefer to simply call it that. Planer will also appear in the gacha animation, or both are on a planer when you get an SSR student. To unlock Planer's gacha animation, you must clear Act 2, or Season 2 Vol 0, of the main story, where you will eventually interact with Planer. After that, Planer can appear in the gacha animation, giving you either a blue or purple recruitment animation. Now, onto the banners. Should you pull for them? Maybe yes. I would put the highest pulling priority on Kirumi, as she is the only tanker who is comfortable to use against the new bosses, and she is also useful against Whackabode Phase 1, thanks to her ability to deflect damage and regenerate X skill cost. Also apply CC. Nico, on the other hand, is a very useful buffer and debuff dispeller, which is required for the upcoming new boss, Drumbarker. So, if you're interested in fighting Drumbarker on insane or higher difficulty, you may want to get these two. But before we talk about the characters, there is something you need to know about the event. It's simple, but also annoying. You have to buy clues using event points, and each clue has the same price. You then need a certain amount of each numbered clue, from 1 to 7. If you buy the wrong clue, you can sell it back and buy the correct one. That's the really annoying part, you have to go back and forth again and again until the event ends. For the shop, if you're lacking Valkyrie discs and books, you may want to buy them. If you already have enough, you can skip them, buy the gifts instead, and then focus on farming event points for Otagi's UE40, or as much as you can. And yes, skipping the furniture in the shop is important. Save your currency for more useful things instead, since you can craft the furniture later. For the welfare student, we have Otagi, and she is important to build. She is an explosive DPS, but you will mainly use her as a sub DPS to destroy the cannon. Her ability allows her to lock onto a target and prioritize attacking that target. Her X skill puts her into a designated marksman stance, increasing her attack speed, and attack range for 35 seconds. She also marks one enemy and prioritizes attacking that marked enemy. This skill is really helpful against Drumbarker, because it allows her to focus on destroying the cannon while other students may ignore it. The cannon also has X skill damage resistance, which makes X skills very ineffective against it. So Otagi who's rely on her basic attacks and basic skill to destroy it. Her basic skill deals greater damage when her ammo count reaches 0, but it only activates while she is in marksman stance. That means without using her X skill, this basic skill will never activate. Her enhanced skill increases attack speed, which helps her deplete her ammo and activate her basic skill faster. It also increases attack at UE40, which is useful as well. I recommend farming her elifs, if you can, unlock her up to UE40. Her sub-skill is another passive that increases attack. Her basic attacks and basic skill also receive a damage multiplier when she receives an X skill damage buff. Nico provides that buff, so her X skill damage buff won't be wasted on Otagi. Otagi doesn't deal damage through her X skill. Instead, her basic attacks and basic skill will benefit from it. That's it for Otagi. I recommend farming her elifs as much as you can, at least until UE40, while only buying what is necessary from the shop, and leaving the rest behind. Enough talk about the event. Let's talk about these two. First is Kirumi. She is a tanker with light armor. Her X skill, to put it simply, activates a shield effect, and puts her into a defensive state. Once this state ends, she restores HP equal to 50% of her remaining shield amount. While she is in this state and gets attacked, she can restore her shield, up to a maximum of 30 attacks. After that, she inflicts a 3-second CC stun on the enemy. It sounds confusing even after simplifying it, but basically, you want to use her X skill when a burst attack is about to hit her. She can block most of those attacks with her shield, up to 30 times. Not sure what I'm talking about anymore, but let's move on. Her basic skill applies a critical damage resistance debuff to the enemy after her defensive state ends. That can be helpful, but make sure it doesn't conflict with Esnagis's basic skill. Her enhanced skill increases defense, which helps reduce incoming damage. It also increases max HP at UE40, but unlocking UE40 isn't necessary. She should still be fine at 4 stars or 5 stars with UE30 in most cases. Her sub-skill is also really helpful. While her shield is active during her defensive state, she increases X skill cost recovery. If the shield is maintained for 5 seconds or longer, she also increases the attack of all strikers. This makes her a very good offensive buffer and debuffer. Aside from blocking damage through her shield and offensive state, she also applies a crucial debuff that reduces critical damage resistance through her basic skill. Her sub-skill also provides an important attack buff to all strikers, meaning it is less likely to conflict with other common attack buffers. Aside from being the main tanker against Drumbaka, her stats also show that she is useful against Wackaboat Phase 1 because of her light armor and skill set. Against Drumbaka, she is basically a must-have unit, and a very comfortable option for tanking the boss's instant burst attack every rotation. Kanoka is an alternative, although I'm not sure how well she will perform there. Kirumi is definitely recommended. The other Fox Limited student is Nico. Nico is a striker support with the ability to dispel a single debuff and increase the X skill damage dealt by all striker allies within range. The X skill damage increase is decent, I'd say, considering she also provides a debuff dispel and an AoE buff. However, she gains stacks for each striker who is an attacker or DPS, with a maximum of 6 stacks. These stacks can be used to increase her X skill damage buff by up to 4% per stack, which would be another 24% at maximum stacks. That should be a total of 74% increased X skill damage if the X skill and sub skill stack that way. Anyway, the dispel works very well against Drumbaka Phase 1. You need a student with a dispel ability to move the platform. If you're careless about this mechanic and think you can survive without dispel, all of your strikers can get stunned for 20 seconds. That's an extremely long stun duration, making dispel very important for avoiding that attack. Even if your strikers can survive the attack, it simply isn't worth trying to deal with it without a dispel. Her basic skill deals damage to enemies and applies burn damage over time. This skill can also help against Drumbaka because it can damage the cannon. Increasing this skill to max level is recommended, so you can destroy the cannon faster. Just make sure to let her basic skill activate before using her X skill. Her enhanced skill increases her fire range and attack, which should help improve the damage dealt by her basic skill. The buff duration increase at UE40 also feels necessary in some situations. There are cases where you charge your DPS to maximum, but Nico's X skill damage buff expires before you use it, resulting in less damage against the boss. Her sub-skill is the one I mentioned earlier. It increases the X skill damage dealt by allies depending on the number of stacks she has. At maximum stacks, she can potentially reach a similar value to Sexy Seer. However, they have different armor types, so Nico doesn't replace Sexy Seer as a striker X skill damage buffer. That's simply not how it works. Anyway, yes, you should get both of them if you're planning to fight Drumbaka on insane or higher difficulty. Now, onto the builds. For Otigi, her level, gear, and skills should all be maxed. 4 stars, UE40 is the minimum recommendation for Drumbaka insane and higher difficulty. For Kirumi, max her level, gear, and skills as well. 4 stars. 4 stars should be enough for insane. 5 stars with UE30 is recommended for Torment, while going beyond that is not mandatory for Drumbaka. For Nico, I recommend maxing her level, gear, including the watch, and all of her skills. She isn't only a buffer, she can also deal some damage to help destroy Drumbaka's cannon, which is one of the most tedious parts of the fight, because you need to destroy all the parts before the boss takes significantly more damage. Since you have to rely heavily on Otigi's basic attacks, you want them to land as many critical hits as possible. 4 stars should be enough, but there may be some situations where you actually need Nico at UE40. If that happens to you, don't hesitate to increase her stars to UE40, but overall, 4 stars should be enough for insane at least. So overall, These Fox limited banners are must pulls if you're preparing for the upcoming Drumbaka raid. I've said it many times, this boss is no joke. If you're an endgame player, you will definitely have a bug time clearing Torment, as it isn't particularly comfortable to clear right now. Moreover, you need certain niche characters like Erika and Haruka dress, which you may want to skip if you're trying to save your Pyrex. But that isn't really a good idea if you are serious about Drumbaka. Of course, there are replacements. Kanoka can replace Kirumi, Aimi can replace Otogi, and you can use another supporter who provides dispel and attack speed buffs for Aimi. I don't think that's a particularly practical approach, though. Pull for the Fox limited students if you want to make Drumbaka phase 1 much more comfortable to clear. Oh yeah, another thing, there will also be a lot of quality of life updates. For example, the skill selection system. Now, you can select up to 5 out of 6 skills for regular battles, and 9 out of 10 skills for final restriction release battles as your starting hand. I know nobody asked about this, but in case your monkey brain starts asking, why not 6 for regular battles and 10 for FRR? Surely, you didn't think the last unselected skill would simply be the last skill card to appear, right? And that should be all. As always, Godspeed.